What if I told you that the man who built 2,509 free libraries around the world, the same libraries where millions learned to read, where countless dreams were born, was also responsible for one of the bloodiest labor battles in American history? Picture this. It's July 6, 1892. Armed Pinkerton agents are floating down the Monongahela River on covered barges, heading toward a steel mill surrounded by a 10-foot-high fence topped with barbed wire. Waiting for them are thousands of locked-out steel workers and their families, desperate and furious. Within hours, a 12-hour gun battle will leave 10 people dead and dozens wounded. The man who orchestrated this violence? Andrew Carnegie, the same Andrew Carnegie whose name graces concert halls, universities, and those beautiful Carnegie libraries you've probably visited. This isn't just a story about one man's contradictions. This is about a fundamental question that haunts our world today. Can immense good ever justify brutal methods? Can you build a better world with the profits of a brutal one? Carnegie himself seemed to think so. He wrote, "The man who dies rich dies disgraced," and gave away 90% of his fortune, over $350 million, worth billions today. But that same fortune was built on 12-hour workdays, subsistence wages, and what workers called hell with the lid off. Modern psychology has even named a phenomenon after him, the Andrew Carnegie effect, describing how reflecting on your legacy motivates philanthropic giving. But here's the twist that makes this story so compelling. Carnegie didn't just stumble into this contradiction. He deliberately engineered it, creating what might be history's most successful PR campaign to transform a robber baron into a patron saint. So buckle up, because we're about to dive into one of the most fascinating and morally complex stories in American history. The story of a man who truly believed you could wash blood off money with books. To understand how Carnegie became capable of such contradictions, we need to go back to where it all began, in a cramped cottage in Dunfermline, Scotland, where a traumatic childhood event would shape one of history's most complex figures. Picture 12-year-old Andrew Carnegie watching his father, Will Carnegie, a skilled hand-loom weaver, suddenly become obsolete overnight. In 1847, steam-powered looms arrived in their town, and just like that, generations of craftsmanship meant nothing. The family was plunged into poverty. His mother had to mend shoes and sell potted meats just to survive. But here's the part that's crucial to understanding Carnegie's later ruthlessness. His father wasn't just a craftsman. He was a political activist, a leader in the Chartist movement fighting for workers' rights. And it all failed. The politics failed, the protest failed, and the family was left destitute. Carnegie later wrote, "I began to learn what poverty meant. It was burnt into my heart then that my father had to beg for work. And then and there came the resolve that I would cure that when I got to be a man." But notice what lesson young Andrew learned. It wasn't, "The system is broken and needs to be fixed." It was, "The system must be mastered, not fought." While his father tried to change the machine through collective action, Andrew decided to become the machine. So in 1848, the family made that desperate Atlantic crossing, 50 days in the miserable steerage of a sailing ship, arriving in Allegheny, Pennsylvania. At just 13, Andrew started as a bobbin boy in a cotton mill, earning $1.20 for a 72-hour week. But here's where his genius first showed. He didn't just work. He studied. He memorized every street in Pittsburgh, every important businessman's face. He taught himself to interpret Morse code by ear, making himself indispensable. And then came the discovery that would change everything: Colonel James Anderson's personal library. This iron manufacturer opened his 1,500 books to working boys for free. Carnegie devoured them: history, literature, everything he could get his hands on. This library didn't just educate him. It gave him the blueprint for his future philanthropy. But the most important lesson came when he met Thomas Scott, superintendent of the Pennsylvania Railroad, who hired 17-year-old Carnegie as his personal telegrapher for $35 a month. Carnegie later said, "I couldn't imagine what I could ever do with so much money." Scott taught Carnegie about insider deals. He'd loan Carnegie money to buy shares in companies, then award those same companies exclusive contracts with the railroad. It was ethically dubious, but perfectly legal, and it was how the game was played. In 1856, Carnegie got his first dividend check and wrote that the first return on an investment is a thrill never to be forgotten. He was hooked. Soon after, he invested in the Woodruff Sleeping Car Company and made $5,000 in 2 years, more than 3 times his annual salary. This is where Carnegie learned the fundamental lesson that would define his life. Real wealth doesn't come from wages. It comes from owning the means of production and making capital work for you. Then came the Civil War, and Carnegie faced his first major moral test. When he was drafted in 1864, he paid an Irish immigrant $850 to serve in his place, a legal but telling choice. While America bled, Carnegie focused on business. The war created massive demand for iron and oil, and his investments flourished. By 1863, his annual income was $42,000, with only $2,400 coming from his railroad salary. For Carnegie, the war wasn't a moral crusade, it was a massive economic opportunity. This cold calculation, this ability to see human tragedy as market opportunity, would define his approach to business for the rest of his life. In 1872, Andrew Carnegie witnessed something that would change not just his life, but the entire American landscape. He was in England, watching Sir Henry Bessemer demonstrate his revolutionary steel-making process. And what he saw was nothing short of magical. Carnegie grasped the implications instantly. Steel had been rare and expensive, but now it could become the backbone of the modern world. He returned to America with a singular mission declaring, "The age of steel is upon us." But here's where Carnegie's genius and ruthlessness really showed. In 1873, the nation was hit by a devastating financial panic. Banks collapsed, factories closed, unemployment soared. It was the first global depression of the industrial age. Most businessmen were terrified and liquidated their assets. Carnegie? He doubled down. Guided by his motto, "The wise man buys when others are selling," he saw opportunity where others saw catastrophe. With labor cheap and materials plentiful, he began construction on a massive steel plant near Pittsburgh, naming it the J. Edgar Thomson Steel Works, after his former railroad mentor. And it paid off spectacularly. The Thomson Works began producing steel rails in 1874, just as the nation recovered and railroad expansion exploded. Armed with the Bessemer process, Carnegie could produce steel at prices his competitors couldn't touch. He systematically slashed the price of steel rails from over $100 per ton in 1873 to just $18 per ton by the 1890s. He didn't just compete in the market, he created it, making steel so affordable it became the essential material for everything from railroads to the skyscrapers that would define America's skyline. But Carnegie's real genius wasn't just in technology. It was in creating what became the blueprint for modern industry. His strategy had 3 pillars: vertical integration, obsessive cost control, and relentless technological upgrading. The results were staggering. By the 1890s, Carnegie Steel was producing more steel than the entire nation of Great Britain and generating annual profits of $40 million. But here's the dark side that Carnegie's admirers often overlook. This empire was built on human suffering. His mills were literal infernos of flames, noise, and danger. Workers endured grueling 12-hour shifts 7 days a week, with only the 4th of July off. The average worker earned about $10 a week, barely above the poverty line, While Carnegie's annual income equaled the combined wages of nearly 4,000 steelworkers, the work was extraordinarily dangerous. Injuries and deaths were commonplace. So yes, Carnegie built a steel empire that transformed America, but its foundations rested on the exhausted bodies of his workforce. This wasn't an accident or an oversight. It was a deliberate choice, a calculated trade-off between human welfare and industrial efficiency. And the most chilling part? Carnegie knew exactly what he was doing. He was building towards something bigger, something that would justify all this suffering in his mind, the moment when he could give it all away and transform from villain to hero. Now we come to the moment that would define Carnegie's legacy forever, a moment that reveals the true cost of his empire and the lengths he would go to protect it. It's 1892, and Carnegie is at the height of his power. But there's a problem. The Amalgamated Association of Iron and Steel Workers at his Homestead Mill, one of the last effective unions in the steel industry. Their contract is expiring, and Carnegie sees an opportunity not just to cut wages, but to crush organized labor forever. Carnegie orchestrated the entire confrontation from his palatial estate in Scotland. He gave his ruthless partner, Henry Clay Frick, complete authority to handle the labor problem, then conveniently distanced himself from what was about to unfold. Frick's plan wasn't negotiation, it was war. He offered the union wage cuts of up to 20%, terms he knew they'd reject. When they refused, he locked out all 3,800 workers and began building what the workers grimly called Fort Frick, a 10-foot-high, 3-mile-long fence around the plant, topped with barbed wire and equipped with sniper towers. But Frick's masterstroke of corporate brutality was yet to come. He hired 300 armed Pinkerton agents, essentially a private army, to seize the plant and protect the non-union scab workers he planned to bring in. At 4 a.m. on July 6, 1892, 2 covered barges carrying these armed mercenaries floated down the Monongahela River toward Homestead. But the workers were waiting. Thousands of striking families rushed to the riverbank to block the invasion of their town. What happened next was unprecedented in American labor history. Someone fired a shot, history doesn't record who, and all hell broke loose. For 12 brutal hours, a full-scale battle raged between the entrenched Pinkertons on their barges and the workers on shore. Picture the scene: rifles cracking, bullets flying, families diving for cover, smoke billowing across the river. This wasn't a strike, it was a siege. By afternoon, the outgunned Pinkertons surrendered, but their ordeal wasn't over. As they were marched through town to jail, an enraged mob of men and women, people whose lives had been shattered by Carnegie's wage cuts, brutally beat them. The final toll: at least 7 workers and 3 Pinkerton agents dead, dozens wounded, and American labor relations changed forever. But here's what makes this story so damning for Carnegie. He won. The governor of Pennsylvania sent 8,500 state militiamen who took control of the plant. The mill reopened with non-union workers. The strike was crushed, the union destroyed, and the steel industry remained non-union for the next 4 decades. And Carnegie? He publicly supported every action Frick took. This wasn't a case of a manager going rogue. This was Carnegie's strategy, executed with military precision while he maintained plausible deniability from his Scottish castle. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Just 3 years earlier, Carnegie had published The Gospel of Wealth, preaching about the ties of brotherhood between rich and poor. He had written extensively about workers' rights to organize, but when push came to shove, literally, those noble principles evaporated like smoke from his blast furnaces. Homestead revealed Carnegie's true philosophy. Workers could organize all they wanted as long as they didn't actually threaten his profits or control. The moment they posed a real challenge, he was willing to use lethal force to crush them. This event permanently stained Carnegie's reputation, but here's the fascinating part. It also accelerated his philanthropic plans. The public outrage was so intense that Carnegie realized he needed a massive public relations campaign to rehabilitate his image. The blood of Homestead would, in a very real sense, water the seeds of his future libraries. The massacre at Homestead wasn't just about breaking a union, it was about establishing the absolute power of capital over labor. It sent a message to every worker in America: challenge the system at your peril. And it set the stage for Carnegie's most audacious gambit yet: the idea that he could literally buy his way back into public favor by giving away his blood-soaked fortune. Here's where Carnegie's story takes its most fascinating and morally complex turn. In 1901, at age 65, he sold his steel empire to J.P. Morgan for an astronomical $480 million, walking away with over $225 million in gold bonds, making him, for a time, the richest man in the world. But then he did something unprecedented in human history. He gave almost all of it away. Over the next 18 years, Carnegie systematically donated over $350 million, nearly 90% of his fortune. But this wasn't random charity. This was scientific philanthropy, a calculated campaign to reshape his legacy and, quite literally, rewrite history. He funded 2,509 free public libraries worldwide, a new library every few days for decades. But here's his genius. Communities had to publicly commit to maintaining them, making local leaders complicit in praising his generosity. He was building monuments to his own benevolence. The scope was staggering. Carnegie Mellon University, the Carnegie Institution for Science, Carnegie Hall, the Peace Palace in The Hague, 7,500 church organs, and pension funds for workers and professors. But here's the haunting question. Did his philanthropy redeem him, or was it history's most successful PR campaign? Carnegie pioneered what psychologists now call moral licensing, using future good deeds to wash away past sins. He created the template every billionaire philanthropist has followed since. He succeeded beyond his wildest dreams, transforming from robber baron to patron saint. Can immense good justify brutal methods? Carnegie bet his entire legacy on yes. And judging by how history remembers him, he might have been right. He didn't just build an empire and give it away. He invented a new form of capitalism where extreme wealth accumulation could be morally justified by extreme wealth distribution. Whether that's redemption or the ultimate con game, that's for each of us to decide.